Today we are going to summarize Plato's major ideas concerning literary theory, and after that move to Aristotle, because in order to understand Aristotle in a good way, you have to understand what are the main points that Plato mentioned in with regard to the literary theory. The first point that we discuss is the idea of the material world we perceive through our body and our senses is not the real world, but an imperfect copy of an ideal world. Plato doesn't believe that the world we live in is our real world. And the real world is something completely different, and it is in another real. So we have just a copy around us. All things around us are copies, not true world. Second point, art in whatever form or medium work to reproduce or represent the perceivable material world. In other words, for Plato, art is representational. It represents what we have already perceived in our senses from the material world. So art is representational. This is the second point. Another thing that Plato emphasized that what is excellent and beautiful and right and good is that which approaches through rational process the truth of the ideal form. Anything beautiful or excellent or right or good for Plato is the thing related to rational process, rational deduction. It has nothing to do with emotional processes. So the truth of the ideal form is or resides in rational deduction. Then there is another point that he stressed that the world is organized into pairs of binary opposites. Everything is related or is attached to its opposite. For example, you have to put things in pairs, and these pairs are opposite to each other. For example, he classified the things according to rational or irrational, whether good or evil, male or female, public or private. So this is the way things organized to him. He organized all things around us in the form of pairs of binary opposites. Another thing that we can conclude from Plato's theory is his attitude to literature. He believed that literature is important, and because of its importance, because it had a great influence on the audience, because of this thing, he needs literature. He emphasized that literature needs to be regulated or supervised, and he focused on the content of the literature more than the form. And his position from poets was very clear. He dismissed them because he considered them liars and have or form a threat to the society, especially the weak-minded, as he said, a slice of the society. He means women and kids. But that doesn't mean that literature is not important. No, he is aware that literature is important. And because of the importance, he emphasized that literature must have a message, and this message must be moral message. And he's against poetry because poetry stimulates feelings. And he is against feelings because he favors mind over feeling. The content of literature, what it says and represents, is more important for Plato than the form it comes. He doesn't care for the form or the word choice or the figures of the speech, the style of the writer, never. He only cares for the content of the literature. Okay, these are the major points when we deal with Plato's criticism. Now we'll move to Aristotle. Aristotle also is a Greek philosopher. And actually, he is the student of Plato. So Plato is his teacher. And here we have the continuity of this discipline, though we find that Aristotle disagrees with his teacher in some points and approves him in some points. So let us start having discussion of Aristotle. He is the other ancient Greek founding father. We said that Plato is the founding father, and also Aristotle is the same thing. He is the other ancient Greek founding father of Western thought. And now we are going to make a contrast between him and Plato. He is less interested in the content of literature than its form. We said that Plato focused on the content, and he said the content must be in accordance with his rules of what is rational and moral. But Aristotle, is less interested in the content. He cares for the form more than the content. So this is the first difference. Plato cares for the content, Aristotle cares for the form. What do we mean by the form? The form of the poem or the form of the play, it deals with the word choice, the expressions, the imagery, the style, the structure. Okay, let us say the structure or the word choice, the diction of the literary work, how the work is presented to us. Plato begins his literary theory by remarking in passing on the place of poets and poetry in his Republic. We know that a great argument and discussion Plato gave to the concept of poetry and poets in his Republic. Republic is the title of the book of Plato. However, Aristotle's book was entitled Poetics. Okay, it is as an answer to Plato, who was against poetry and poets. Now, Aristotle had a different position regarding literary theory in general, literary works in general, and poetry in particular. So Aristotle's Poetics is the first full work in the Western tradition devoted specifically to literary criticism. So to understand Aristotle's views on poetry and poetics, it's useful to start with understanding how Aristotle understood the nature of reality. The first thing we are going to discuss is the concept of reality, and according to Aristotle. Aristotle said that the material world and we'll explain in reference to Plato. We making a contrast and some comparison between the two philosophers. The concept of reality. We'll start with the concept of reality. The material world. We refer to it the world around us. We call it the material world, and the human perception of reality. And how does man understand this reality? How does man interact with the world around him, with the material world, I mean? How does he regard the material world? And let us see how Aristotle's view contrasted with Plato. Remember what Plato said about the material world. He said that it's not real, and it's a copy of another perfect real. This is what Plato said about the material world and the concept of reality. Aristotle begins with the idea that art is not necessarily an imitation. Also, Plato said that art is imitation or representational, and it's a copy of a copy. Okay, here, this is the point where Aristotle starts. He said that it's not necessary that the art or literature is a representational or imitation or a reproduction of nature. Okay, this is the point he contrasted with Plato. He said, and thus is not necessarily inferior production copy of nature. And he said that literature is not inferior because Plato puts literature inferior to other disciplines or other knowledge form like science, biology, maths, etc. For Plato, literature comes in the second or inferior position if compared with scientific text. Aristotle here said, no, it's not necessarily a representational or imitation or not real, as Plato said. In other words, it's not inferior. It's exactly has the same position and same importance of other form of knowledge like maths and biology and etc. For Aristotle, art is a process of putting the events of nature into a medium. He said, no, it's not imagination. It's not representational. It's not just something that you copy and make a copy of a copy. It is a real process of putting the events of nature into a medium. You took the material world around you and put it in another medium. Just you change the medium, such as words or paint. When you put it in the medium of words, it will be literature, like poems, short stories, novel, drama, etc. And if you put it in by painting, it's artistic piece. So it's not copy, it's not representational. You are taking them from nature and putting them in another medium. That improves on our complete nature. In other words, we are not imitating nature. No. For him, for Aristotle, writers or artists completes nature. Okay, this is very important. They complete nature. Is that clear? They complete nature. So here the difference between him and Plato. Plato considered art something, okay, inferior or marginal if compared with science. But Aristotle say, no, we are important. Literature is important. Art is important because they complete nature. Art doesn't lie. Also, this is an answer for Plato when he said that poets or artists are liars. When he dismissed poets and he said that they must go out or leave the republic, they are dangerous. Why? Because they tell lies. He said art doesn't lie. This is Aristotle. According to this view, he reveals the truth in different way. The writer or the artist reveals the truth in a different way. This way is not scientific. It's not rational. So you cannot tell that artists, or you cannot say that artists are liars simply because they use a deduction a way different from your rational deduction, which is the imagination. Okay, so this is not lie. For Aristotle, art is not necessarily the binary opposite of reason. If you, according to Plato, we said he arranged or organized things in binary opposites. When we come to reason, he said, we don't put art as a binary opposite of reason, and thus treating the logic rationality as if you tell that art is against reason, or is a danger to reason, or again a danger to logic, or opposite of logic and rationality. Aristotle understands that the pleasure we take in representations conveys another type of a truth, not a disruptive and dangerous falsehood. He said, when you read these representations, you have a pleasure. by this literary appreciation, artistic appreciation of the painting, or literary appreciation of their work, like play or poem or short story. And this joy or this pleasure is a kind of truth. It's not a lie, it's another truth. And so it's not dangerous or false, as Plato said. For Aristotle, reality does not reside in a static eternal world of perfect ideal forms. Plato said that reality, the real thing, the true thing, reside in a static, in never changing world, and this world is in an eternal realm, the eternal world, where everything is perfect. But Aristotle said, no, reality does not reside in a perfect or a static eternal world. So what is reality according for Aristotle? He said that the material world is a flawed imitation, rather reality is the ever-changing world of appearance and perception. He said, against Plato's argument, he said, who said that this world is a flawed imitation. He said, no, reality is the ever-changing world. Reality, this world is not static. It's changing all the time. The ordinary world of things and events within this ever-changing world, form appears only in concrete instances. You find them only in concrete instances. But Plato, on the other hand, said that, for example, let us have an example. If we have any particular chair, he said that this particular chair was only an imitation of something perfect. This chair is an inferior copy of the ideal form of the chair that would be in the perfect realm, in the other life. Okay, this is what Plato said. Aristotle, on the other hand, was different in this point from Plato. Okay, only deduced biological process. This is Plato. Aristotle, by contrast, argues that the only way we can know the essence of the chair, for example, the true meaning of a chair, is through individual instances of chairs. For Aristotle, form exists only in the concrete examples. Form exists only in the concrete examples of that form. So when you see a tree, yes, it's a true tree. It's a real one, not a copy or not an imitation, because this form exists in the concrete form of the tree that we see in the front of us. If we let's go back to the example of the chair. If we speak about the chair, the form of this chair exists only in the concrete example of the chair, not in some eternal ideal abstraction. In other words, what does Aristotle want to say? He simply wants to tell us that in the world that we can see by we can perceive by our senses. I mean that you can see by your eyes, you can touch by your hand, you can smell, you can, in other words, you can perceive by your senses. These things exist according to ordered principles, which we can discover. Aristotle's truth, what his philosophy seeks to understand and teach, resides in discovering the rules and the principles that govern how things work and take on meaning in our material world. He said that the material world around us is true, but you have to discover the rules of this material world, to dig deep down to find the secrets that are hidden in this world, to understand the principles that govern how things work. If you did so, you can understand this world, this material world. In other words, Aristotelian thought forms the foundation for science in Western philosophy. These principles help those who came many years after Aristotle by give them the ability to put the foundations for science. Aristotle is interested in observing specific phenomena, okay, and then deducing. And this is the principle of the scientific method. Observation, the scientific process depends on what? Observations. And after the observation, you have to deduce from those observations the rules that govern how all things around us behave. So observe, look at things around you, look at nature, try to understand things clearly, then by thinking, try to reach conclusions. And this principle helped the establishment of Western philosophy, science in Western philosophy. And the Western philosophy had attributed the foundation of science to Aristotle. Aristotle's science desires to catalog and classify things. The first one who gave the idea of classification was Aristotle. He classified the material world. His methods worked to discover similarities and differences in form. He looked at the forms of things and searched how they are similar or different. Under these similarities or differences, he was able to give us a general principle of the organization, or let's say taxonomy of these forms. Aristotle's science is the foundation of biological classification. When you study biology, for example, you will find classification there. The systems are classified. You learned in high school biology how to classify the organism by placing it within the system of plant kingdom, okay, or human kingdom and insects, okay? So the idea of classification is taken from Aristotle. So biology benefited from the Aristotelian criticism or system of organization. Now, let's move to the concept of poetry, because the book, Aristotle's book is called Poetics. Now, Aristotle treats poetry and all art form, by the way, not necessarily poetry, but we are going to focus on poetry here. He treats all art forms, including poetry, like biology. And this is very important. According to Plato, he doesn't treat poetry and art forms like biology or math. No, he considers